Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair. Apologies for the sound of my voice. I'm fighting a cold, but I just wanted to, before we go into the episode today, just remind you one more time that at the end of the month, on October the 31st, we'll be dropping our second ever Scandalous Games syncable commentary track, this time for the 2005 Carl Urban, Rosamund Pike, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson film, Doom. We had a lot of fun recording this, and so I hope you'll have a lot of fun listening to it. So again, check out our feed on October the 31st for our syncable commentary track on Doom. And with that out of the way, back to the show.
Hey, I don't spell amendment the way you want me to spell it. I spell it my way.
Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
Hi, my name's Phil, and you can consider me to be a video game newbie.
Yo, I'm Elford. I'm a video game aficionado.
I'm Kate, and I write software, but not the fun kind.
All right, we're going to be continuing our discussion this month about Dave Grossman and his supposed bona fides. And as we learned last time, a lot of them are not terribly impressive. As we talked about last time, his assertions that he's a paratrooper and an army ranger and a former West Point professor and all the other stuff we covered last time. So we're going to pick that up this time with a couple more aspects of his career that he brags on his website that, as we're going to find out, are, to be honest, pretty fucking sad.
All right, so we talked a bit about some of the bigger concerns I have about Dave. Like, he's taking these quotations that he thinks are praising him, which actually aren't, out of context, and misrepresenting himself as a professor and things like that. And I want to take us on kind of a lighter note with the stuff he presents. And Elford, you brought this up a while back, because my favorite fake claim of Dave's is that he will have you believe that he's a martial arts master. In case you missed it, here's the line again from his official bio. Quote, "He has a black belt in Hojutsu, the martial art of the firearm. He has been inducted into the USA Martial Arts Hall of Fame," end quote. And did you find anything else about that, Elford, when you were looking up into Hojutsu? Because we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to dissect both of these claims, both that he's a black belt in Hojutsu and that he's a part of a martial arts Hall of Fame.
Nothing about the current anything with Hojutsu, no. Just that there was something called Hojutsu.
All right, for context, again, this is totally a layperson looking at Wikipedia. So according to Wikipedia, Hojutsu, also known as the art of gunnery, and this is a quotation taken directly from the definition in Wikipedia, is, quote, "the martial art of Japan dedicated to Japanese black powder firearm uses. Hojutsu is still practiced today, often with antique matchlock firearms such as the Tanegashima. The martial art is most common in Japan, where access to historical equipment is easier for practitioners," end quote. So that's Wikipedia's definition. So it sounds like to me that Hojutsu in this sense appears to be like the Japanese equivalent of Revolutionary or Civil War reenactors in the United States, where these are people who maintain, demonstrate, and fire black powder weapons. So things like muskets and rifles, things like flintlock pistols and things like that. Like, that sounds like what this scene is. These are black powder people. And everything, the stuff I've looked online seems to suggest it's like a very specific time period, very specific type of historic weaponry. However, that is not the Hojutsu the self-proclaimed killologist claims he's a black belt in. That is Hojutsu Ryu, an ancient martial arts form that dates all the way back to the late 1990s. This Hojutsu, called the art of shooting, as opposed to the art of gunnery.
Was it Gamekata? Wait, is this Gamekata?
It's kind of Gamekata.
Okay.
And if you want us to explain what Gamekata is?
That's the film Equilibrium, the martial arts with guns.
This is kind of Gamekata.
Is there a better way to explain that? That's all I got.
So Gamekata was created. It was created for Equilibrium, the movie, and sounds really intelligent and deep when you're dumb college freshman like I was when I first saw Equilibrium, and it seems a lot significantly dumber when you watch it as an adult. But the premise in that is that we've got these people who have mastered every angle of the firearm and can kill anybody at angles and use guns in a martial arts fighting thing. Look up Gamekata on Equilibrium videos. It's both cool and very, very silly. This is kind of what Hojutsu is. So Hojutsu was formed in the late 1990s, created by a former Alaska state trooper named Jeff Hall. And it's basically the martial art of loading and firing guns real good.
So I'm visualizing him wearing a black trench coat and some shades like Neo.
Oh, God. How did he feel about The Matrix, Kevin? Do you know? Because generally people who object to video games also don't like the Matrix, but he seems like he would like to have been an extra.
I'm sure he has very strong opinions about the Matrix. Some of them don't really jive well with the creators.
Probably like he would be okay with the Matrix if he had been casted as Neo, and it happened, then now it's bad.
So yeah, from what I've read about Hojutsu Ryu, it's basically an excuse for dudes to walk around wearing gis in between sessions at the firing range.
They formed that group just so that people would stop beating them up at the gun range.
We are super cool. It's not sad.
My mom's taking us out for pizza after this, and you can't come.
Wait, guns weren't enough of a deterrent, but you thought karate would be?
I'm reminded of that image from Arrested Development. We demand to be taken seriously. It's a bunch of guys holding AK-47s and wearing gis. So my young Padawan learners, I hear you ask, how does one become a black belt in the art of shooting? According to Sensei Jeff, now he calls himself Soke Jeff, but I think Sensei is funnier, so I'm going to call him Sensei Jeff instead. Courtesy of his website, martialartofthegun.com, which as an aside is a homestead page, which I didn't know those still existed. Kids, ask your parents. Like, I had a Homestead page when I was in high school. I didn't know Homestead was still around.
I might have missed Homestead. What was that?
It's basically like GeoCities. It's like another version of, like, for the context of our younger listeners, once the internet became popularized in the 1990s, like everybody and their grandma set up their own home pages for things. And some of the ways that people would do is they would go through these free website providers. GeoCities was a pretty common one. And another one was Homestead. That was one I used when I was in high school because I was really into the 80s cartoon Mask, and I made a Mask fan page over Homestead. I thought they went out of business like a decade ago, and I find this fucking Homestead page.
They
Wow.
were Homestead was acquired by web.com, which is one of the preeminent website hosting design solution services that's out there on the web right now today.
Wow.
It would be like, a small company being acquired by a much larger one that does something similar, right? So it's not absolutely gobsmacking, like, oh my gosh, they've just been here this whole time. It's like, no, they were acquired.
That just stunned me, though, when I read this. Is provided by Homestead. It's like, Jesus Christ, I thought they were... Have I seen a ghost? They're still around. But according to this Homestead page for Sensei Jeff, one obtains the rank of black belt in Hojutsu by first completing the 10 Q ranks. That's K-Y-U, Q ranks. These involve learning such techniques as firearm safety, proper stance, tactical and speed reloading, position shooting, such as firing from a standing or a prone position, and researching the history of firearms. Once one completes all that, they earn the level of first-degree black belt in being a super cool gun guy by passing 3 handgun shooting courses with at least 90% accuracy, performing a series of weapon manipulations under a certain time, passing a written test, and writing an essay on their personal views of firearms as a martial art, which I'll just bet basically boils down to reassuring Sensei Jeff that his made-up martial art is super cool and not something a sad divorced dad would make up. And I found reviews about Hojutsu. I found from this one website, which talked about how it seemed like the techniques he taught are all well and good, but they only really work if you're in a state that does open carry. So, like, it's all well and good that do these techniques if you're allowed to, openly carry guns as opposed to concealed carry. But that's what this is. It's basically you go into a karate dojo and then you hit the gun range is basically what this thing is. It's not sad. It's not sad. Speaking of personal views, by the way, personal views on guns, Sensei Jeff's site also hosts a bunch of articles on how all forms of gun control are part of a liberal plot to disarm and oppress real Americans under a blog whose title somehow spelled Second Amendment wrong.
Hey, I don't spell amendment the way you want me to spell it. I spell it my way.
That is true American freedom right there. That's the right as an American. So there you go, kids. It turns out you can just make up your own martial arts. And with that, I've been inspired to say that I'm happy to announce that I am a 5th degree black belt and grandmaster of Gamekata, the martial art of the video game. And for a mere $10,000, during 5 2-hour workshops, I will teach you the ancient and secret art of beating someone up with one of those giant first-generation original Xbox controllers. I'm open to ideas on our logo, but I'm leaning towards cross swords over a Wii balance board. But send your ideas to scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com.
But Kevin, how did you have time for that while working on Elden Ring?
I developed Elden Ring and learned my techniques while fighting, Melania. And I will teach you again. I will do if you want for $20,000. Now, this is a bargain to our listeners. I will teach you the secret art of bringing over a friend, inviting them to play video games. And while they're playing video games and really having a good time, just braining them with a pipe. Gamekata.
I never saw it coming.
Achievement unlocked.
Again, I put my email in there if people want to learn my time-honored strategies.
Or buy your new controller because this one's caked with brain matter.
So, in fact, Sensei Jeff is pretty proud to call Grossman not just one of his pupils, but one of his fellow teachers and possibly his employee/business partner. So the website for Jeff's company, called the Force Options Integrated Fighting System, has Sensei Jeff posing with numerous pictures of Dave Grossman, including one of them where the Killologist earns his brown belt in Hojutsu. I will bring up these images so you can see them. And again, sad divorced dad vibes from the two of these guys. So I'm bringing up this image. The dude on the left-hand side in the black gi, that's Sensei Jeff. The dude on the right is Dave Grossman, earning his brown belt in Hojutsu with Soke Jeff. And here's another one on another part of this website in which Dave is in a gi. And it's not sad. It's not sad.
What year was this website made in?
Copyright's in 2023, but given that homestead page, it could be made in 1997.
Maybe.
Can I ask a question then we may have answered and I just forgot about it, in which case feel free to cut this out. What was the situation with Dave Grossman's father?
That's a good question. I don't know too much about his family background aside from his dad he was apparently in the army at one point, because Dave was born in Germany, which suggests that he was born on an army base. So his dad might have been in the army, and then he was apparently at one point a police officer in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And then eventually he got a job as a security officer for Boeing. So he's got like a cop military background, but I don't know anything about
a lot of stuff falling into place here, honestly. And I'm not even trying to be funny. I mean, just like,
it might say a lot about the fact that when he was a kid, he bounced and went to the army when he turned 18.
Now, did he willingly go, like he wanted to, or?
Don't know. Like, I don't know. I haven't found very many writings where he talks about his childhood or his background or his upbringing. So we can only infer stuff from, like, this sad divorced dad stuff he does,
I mean, I'm not even saying sad divorced dad stuff, because I'm just more the freaks of desperate need for approval from a male father figure that he never had.
That's possible.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. That typically comes from a really sad upbringing. That martial arts picture that you put up there, like.
Well, okay, being a Pulitzer Prize nominee, I would have to take your word for it.
It's funny because, like, I see those pictures and I read about both Jeff Hall and Dave Grossman about this stuff. And you ever have one of those friends of yours who's like really into like samurai swords and like historic weapons, and like they like to collect swords and they like to show off their swords? He sounds like one of those dudes where it's like, again, it's the emphasis of like, it's not sad. You need to make sure he knows how tough he is. And this is the vibe I get from a guy like this.
Well, you've got to be impressed by Dave's commitment to the bit.
It's all, again, 100% not something a sad person would do. Was that joke that became a meme from Parks and Recreation where Ben Wyatt loses his job and he's making stop motion and he's holding a little stop motion figure of himself? Is this something a depressed person would do? But then again, we were laughing about Hojutsu. You know what? We need to respect both Dave and Sensei Jeff because they are inductees into the USA Martial Arts Hall of Fame. So you can go and stuff your naysaying in a sack. But that raises the question then, is being a member of said Hall of Fame actually an accomplishment? So what do we think about that? What do we think about being inducted into a Hall of Fame like the USA Martial Arts Hall of Fame?
Now I don't know what to think. All of these institutions, I was raised to believe that they had foundations that were finite. I was raised to believe that an institution like the Martial Arts Hall of Fame had credible, long-term practitioners and studiers of those arts that were verified, and that they would ensure that someone who gets into this Hall of Fame had spent years practicing and contributing to martial arts in general and had made a difference to the world through their accomplishments.
Well put. This is actually one of the funniest parts of this research, actually, one of my favorite parts of this episode. So yeah, it sounds impressive. Sounds like you've been, like Elford said, you've been making major contributions to, our understanding of martial arts. You're advancing the art of fighting and all that stuff. You'll likely not be surprised that more than a few people in the martial arts community don't have much respect for this Martial Arts Hall of Fame or similar Martial Arts Hall of Fame. Case in point, the only requirements for induction that I found into the USA Martial Arts Hall of Fame are to be nominated by someone already in it and to pay an admission fee. That's it. You get someone else who's in on the game, and then you pay like $100 or whatever. They even have an induction ceremony to be in the Hall of Fame that you have to pay to go to.
So you're saying, in addition to this being a Pulitzer Prize nominated podcast, we could also be inducted into a martial arts Hall of Fame for just a little bit more.
That's what I was thinking. How much does it cost?
I forgot. I actually had to look that up. So, again, the only required for induction I've found for the USA Martial Arts Hall of Fame is to be nominated by someone already in it and to pay an admission fee. Other than that, I can't find any martial arts related credentials to join it, which you think would be an important part of a martial arts Hall of Fame. And doing some research, there are in fact more than a few people in the fighting community who see martial arts halls of fame as a scam, preying on insecure men who want to pad their resumes and impress people who know nothing about martial arts, which, given what we've already learned about the Pulitzer Prize nominated West Point professor who definitely co-wrote a book with Glenn Beck, checks out. I also found it very funny that the website for the USA Martial Arts Hall of Fame devotes a suspicious amount of time reassuring people their Hall of Fame doesn't just induct celebrities. And even if they did, anyone who worked hard in martial arts should be happy to be a member, regardless if they're a celebrity or not, which is a profoundly weird thing to write. It really gets me thinking that your Martial Arts Hall of Fame is either just for celebrities or is targeting people who want to be associated with celebrities. According to their website, the USA Martial Arts Hall of Fame was founded by, and I'm reading this verbatim, Dr. Jim Thomas, PhD, DSc, MA, DSc. And before I go any further, I have two asides here, just based on this dude's name, on Dr. Jim Thomas. First off, no real PhD writes both doctor and PhD in their title because it's a redundancy. You're either going to call yourself Dr. So-and-so or your name PhD. And this is coming from Dr. Kevin Impellizeri, PhD.
Kevin is a super doctor.
I do not have the extra degrees that this motherfucker's got. So the other part of it is that if I'm reading these letters correctly, and I did some research on these, I've obviously heard of PhD. DSc and MA-DSc I'd never heard of, so I looked it up. And the closest I can see is that he's trying to claim he's got 3 doctorates, this guy, Jim Thomas. One of them is apparently a doctorate of science, and if I'm reading the MA-DSc, let's say you have a master's doctorate, which is not a thing. That's not a real degree. That leads me to believe the actual total of doctorates he has is 0, and that he's just padding his resume. Lending further credence to my hypothesis that this so-called martial arts man of letters is not how he presents himself is the Hall of Fame's mission statement written by Dr. Thomas, PhD, a language that reads either like AI or an email scammer for whom English is not their first language. Quote, "Oftentimes we hear from some, I don't deserve such honor. This is so untrue. In fact, please remember that this is not a celebrity-only function," celebrities in quotes. "This function is designed for martial artists," martial artists is capitalized, "at all levels. It takes the instructors of today to ensure," and that ensure is INSURE, which is not the correct usage, it should be ENSURE, hours in quotations for some reason. So ensure our world of martial arts continues via worldwide. Many instructors is capitalized, use their savings to begin schools, mortgage homes, away from families always, suffered marriages, relationships, due to time spent at schools. While many watch a movie with the family, some instructors work at his or her desk planning classes, projects, things to stay alive. So yes, everyone, you is in all caps, our martial arts history, and don't forget that. Allow yourself and yours the opportunity to share your world. Accept your award with honor. Honor is also in quotes for some reason. You deserve it. Those celebrities are brought in. The actual format is designed for those martial artists, artist is singular, who live, eat, and dream of the arts, arts is in capital, and those people who deserve a place in our martial arts history. Our celebrities we bring in once had instructors like those who will receive awards. They are the ones who gave the celebrities the opportunity to be who they are today. For that, yes, you deserve such an honor, end quote. Thoughts on this?
He just seems like a guy who's, I thought, somewhat full of shit, but now I'm convinced he's entirely full of shit.
I feel like I'm being mean by making fun of this guy. It sounds like he took too many blows to the head before he wrote this.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, this is a person who shouldn't be given the time of day.
And Dave thought this was worth putting in his resume. Super proud to be part of Dr. Jim Thomas, PhD, and whatever the fuck he added at the end of it. And again, all you need is to pay an application fee to get in a sense. So it reminds me of like, if you've ever seen, like, if you have kids who are preparing to get into college, you might be solicited by like various honor societies where the only requirement is to pay to join this honor society so that it makes their academic credentials sound pretty good to get into college. And literally the only thing that those things measure are whether or not you were willing to pay money to pad your kid's application. It sounds like that. All right, so let's start wrapping things up by circling back to On Killing and its impact. I think we've had a fair amount of a good laugh over Dave's alleged credentials, but let's go back to On Killing and kind of bring these things back towards video games. So despite yawns from academia and ho-hums from the popular press, there were definitely audiences who were picking up what Grossman was putting down in his first book. One of those groups were pop psychologists, where the real academic rigor is. For example, no less than Dr. Joyce Brothers herself gave a tacit endorsement to On Killing in the August 26, 1996 edition of her syndicated column, describing it as a, quote, excellent book, end quote, and adding Grossman, quote, points out that not only was the Vietnam soldier trained differently than soldiers of earlier wars, but he was totally desensitized and conditioned to overcome the normal resistance to killing. According to Grossman, that kind of training was intentional. He feels that the epidemic, the virus of violence in our society, in video games, on movie screens, and in our streets is directly related, end quote. She also incorrectly labels Dave Grossman as a Vietnam veteran, which he wasn't. He enlisted in the Army the same year the U.S. withdrew from Vietnam. Other people who embraced On Killing were the military and law enforcement communities. Although I don't know if that was true when it came out, or if On Killing's popularity in those circles was an offshoot of Grossman's later fame as a self-proclaimed media expert and law enforcement trainer. So I kind of don't know when this happens. And this is also tying to how many copies of On Killing Grossman actually sold. It sounds like today it's a legitimate bestseller, but it's probably because it mostly caters to those audiences, to the law enforcement crowd, to the military crowd. For example, as he claims on his bio, On Killing, as well as another of his books called On Combat, are part of the U.S. Marine Corps' Foundational Commandant's Professional Reading List for Marines at the career-level officer and career-level enlisted ranks as part of a pool of 12 books for which Marines at those ranks need to read 5 per year as part of their professional development. So basically, the U.S. Marines has for officers, they put together a list of books that you have to read at least some of these for your professional development every year. And a couple of Grossman's books are on there. It also apparently was at one point on the U.S. Military Academy's Commandant's Reading List. However, that's not as prestigious as you might think. For example, the 2020 version of the Commandant of Cadets reading list was put on their official Instagram, and it included the likes of How to Win Friends and Influence People, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and in a callback to our previous episodes, SLA Marshall's book Men Against Fire. Reliable sources. Those are the things training our soldiers these days. Grossman also brags that On Killing is required reading at West Point and the FBI Academy, as well as appearing on numerous college syllabi. However, while this is a claim that is virtually impossible to prove or disprove, I will point out, as someone who has been in academia for a good part of their life, that number one, sometimes professors assign students a book that they wrote, which I could see Grossman doing as an adjunct. Number two, professors are as prone to poor judgment as any of us, so they might think a book is actually good when it's not. And number three, sometimes professors deliberately assign bad books to help students identify poorly constructed arguments. Though where Grossman fit into those, I don't know. It's also worth mentioning that there was another group that really, really loved On Killing, and this will be important when we talk about Grossman's relationship to the violent video game debate. Second Amendment advocates. The gun lobby loves On Killing and Dave. Unsurprisingly, Grossman's message that violent media, not guns, was the real cause behind violent crime played really well among people calling for the freedom for all Americans to have as many high-powered weapons and hollow-point bullets as their bank accounts would allow, and On Killing became a convenient go-to example to lend academic credence to the argument that guns don't kill people, time crisis does. For example, Grossman had an article on violent video games published in the June 2nd, 2000 edition of Executive Intelligence Review, a newsletter published by convicted fraudster, conspiracy theory monger, 8-time presidential candidate, and friend of the pod, Lyndon LaRouche. In fact, that same year, Lyndon LaRouche himself wrote an article in that same journal declaring gun control laws were diversions concocted by big toy and video game companies so they could distract the public while they peddled violence to children, writing, quote, a crucial feature of a clean inquiry is to recognize the fraud implicit or actually intended in the use of any hysterical gun law reform diversionary effort to cover up for the crucial role of the popular mass media and firms such as Hasbro in mass brainwashing of children to become, even as young children, programmed agents of blind terrorist modes of mass murder by means which do not depend in any characteristic fashion on firearms, end quote. Thoughts?
Well, first, I didn't expect Lyndon LaRouche to make an appearance, but I think this is the just full of BS trifecta when you've got Lyndon LaRouche, now Dave Grossman, and Jack Thompson. I guess anytime all three of them are involved somehow, just to say where there's smoke, there's fire.
Seems like between the guy who runs the martial arts studio and the guy who's running the Martial Arts Hall of Fame, he's got his own group of interesting cats that probably have some interesting things to say about this world.
It's like a rat king of grifters, you know? I will also direct listeners to Lyndon's wife, Helga Zepp LaRouche, who, as we know from our previous episode on Pokemon, has some strong opinions about video games and, again, uses video game violence as kind of an apologia for gun violence. And I direct again to my favorite line from her speech, also from 2000, quote, "Don't worry about guns because Pokemon trained kids will kill you with fire, lightning, electricity, or anything else. And the more internet connections to schools we have, if there are no fundamental changes in the education system, the more little monsters you will have, and they are not going to be Pokemon monsters," end quote. And again, I direct you back to our long series on Pokemon-related fan projects for more on Helga's thoughts on the relationship of video games to society, particularly Pokemon. On Killing also attracted some international play. And Phil, you asked way back about what are people talking about regarding, the international impact? Is this just America or is this internationally? Here's where some of that comes into play. Because some gun control opponents in other parts of the world outside of America also cited On Killing. For example, on April 28, 1996, a mass shooter in Port Arthur, Tasmania, killed 35 people in the worst mass shooting in Australian history. The shooting prompted the Australian government to enact stricter measures controlling weapons access in Australia, measures that at least one editorial writer for the Queensland-based Courier Mail saw as a grave injustice, citing Grossman's work as an example of how video games, not assault rifles, were the real threat to civil order, writing in a March 29, 1997 editorial, quote, "Perhaps our politicians should read a recently released American book, On Killing, the Psychological Cost of Learning to Kill in War and Society, by former paratrooper and present university professor, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman," end quote. Adding the shooter was able to enact his massacre because he was probably desensitized by violent media. And skipping ahead to the present, Grossman remains a popular figure in the American gun lobby and among anti-gun control politicians. For example, following a pair of mass shootings in El Paso, Texas, and Toledo, Ohio in August 2019 that left 31 people dead, Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick explained on Fox and Friends that it must have been caused by those nasty video games in language reminiscent of On Killing, explaining, quote, "What's changed in this country? We've always had guns, we've always had evil, but what has changed since we've had this rash of shootings? And I see a video game industry that teaches young people to kill," end quote. Now compare that to the following passage from On Killing, which we covered a few episodes ago. Quote, "Drugs, gang, poverty, racism, and guns are vital ingredients in a process that has resulted in skyrocketing violence levels in our society. But drugs have always been a problem, just as drugs, alcohol, and so on have always been present in combat. Gangs have always been present, just as combat has always taken place in organized units. Poverty and racism have always been part of our society, often much more so than today, just as propaganda, class divisions, and racism have always been manipulated in combat. And guns have always been present in American society, just as they've always been present in American wars," end quote. So we can kind of see the continuity between what Grossman is saying way back in 1996 and what even more modern politicians are saying. It's very, very similar, if not the same language. Incidentally, Dave Grossman is also a frequent guest speaker at the annual meeting of the National Rifle Association and associates a lot with NRA people. So, for example, our old buddy, saddest of divorced dads, Sensei Jeff, also happens to be a certified NRA speaker, in case you couldn't tell from his stance on gun control as a form of liberal big government tyranny. And a topic I'm looking to research maybe for a future episode is the incredible amount of intersections between the conversation that video games cause violent behavior and violent crime and the influence of the gun lobby. That's something I'm looking into now. And so to tie things up and finally close the book on Killing, ultimately I see this book, as deeply flawed and troubling as it is, as a means to an end for Grossman. A way of telling a general audience that he's an authority in violence without actually being one. In fact, looking at his body of work alongside all these alleged accomplishments, things like, his alleged Hall of Fame, his black belt in Hojutsu, and all the other stuff we've covered, he clearly bet on people taking his claims of being an expert at face value because they do not hold up to even a minimal amount of critical scrutiny. And the depressing thing is, you know what? Given his future career as a motivational speaker, pundit, and alleged expert in video game violence, he clearly bet successfully. And skipping ahead, this veneer has both served him well and made him a shit ton of money. With that in mind, we have finally cleared through all the prologue we're going to need when addressing Dave Grossman as a violent video game critic. So I sincerely promise that we will take a month off to kind of process all this and pivot to another topic before taking a pivot back to Dave Grossman's crusade against video games and actually approach this directly. Talk about the circumstances under which Dave Grossman became a violent video game expert and how he had a profound influence on the way we think about violent video games as a political issue. But before we do that, let's check back on it. How's everybody doing?
I'm ready to talk about a topic other than Dave Grossman for a month.
Yes.
Well, I've been learning about Dave Grossman on this podcast, and very interesting character, building up a story of who he is at every single turn, creating a life, creating value out of thin air, and then going on to have a successful career based on this straw foundation he's built. I'm excited.
I'm with you. I'm finally glad to take a break from this guy. It's just amazing that I could have gone longer. I could have done more. And eventually I just had to hit a point where I just stopped digging into his claims just because it just added way more work for me. Every one of his claims should be marked with an asterisk. Every one of them has to be critically examined or scrutinized just because they don't hold up to any scrutiny. And it is always that frustrating amount of thing. You think you present yourself one way. I think most of us try to be honest and do things in good faith. And here's a guy who the evidence seems pretty clear that he's just bullshitted his way through this. And he's just made up so much of this. His research is really bad. It's based on really selective readings of things and not very deep, intellectually curious inquiry. And then just some of the stuff, it's it's like propping up participation trophies and the saddest things to present as major accomplishments. And you'd like to think that any person would have more dignity than that. It's so amazing the level of shamelessness that this demonstrates. And how low a person like this must think of other people in terms of their intellectual intelligence and in terms of their ability to view things critically. Now, skipping ahead, it's clearly worked. Skipping ahead, this dude is arguably the most influential police trainer in the United States. He does hundreds of speaking engagements a year. He's had U.S. presidents who have cited him as a credible source, but it's so incredible just how easily and how some of this stuff did not take very long to debunk. The Slate article, I searched the quotation and very immediately had something that refuted it. It's so frustrating that again, it just demonstrates people betting on not people being stupid, but the people being so willing to believe someone who clearly validates a specific worldview.
I think that's what we were. I want to jump in. I think that's what we were getting at earlier. It's this person validates a belief that I already have, therefore I'm going to point to them as credible. And when you say politicians or U.S. presidents, presidential candidates, what did you say, Kev?
U.S. presidents have...
Right. That would be easy enough, right? Because this guy is being presented as in the realm of credible. He's a professor, he's a Pulitzer Prize nominated X, Y, and Z. Therefore, this is a belief that I already have, and, I need to reinforce my credibility and the importance of my position on this to my constituents. And here's somebody I can point to. I don't have to do any research on them. I'm just going to go ahead and say, yep, they know what they're talking about. It's upsetting for sure. I guess it doesn't really shock me, though, that this has happened with him. There are enough people who want to have the same point of view that you're putting out there, then there are going to be people who will use your public point of view to point to as a way to back up their own opinion, I guess.
Yeah. And so many people are so eager to find someone who validates their worldview that they're not interested in giving that kind of thing scrutiny. I think this should be a public service announcement. Anytime we have pundits, and especially news segments where we bring in an alleged expert on thing, I think that it's good citizenship to critically examine how are they an expert? How are they presenting themselves an expert? And in what ways do their qualifications mean that they're somebody we should listen to? And I think that Dave is a very useful case study for that, as a person who there's so many blatant examples of this person sort of propping themselves up. And clearly it worked. And again, skipping ahead, when we do cover when Dave Grossman directly gets involved in the video game conversation, that there were tons of members of the press who were more than willing to talk to Dave, to signal boost his ideas, and did not critically examine him in any way. And there are a lot of faults that we can find with a lot of different institutions for why Dave is able to present who he was. It's not just that Dave is a grifter who is basically making up a lot of his credentials. It's that he found people willing to uncritically signal boost him in the press, in politicians, in people who you think should know better and we should hold to a higher standard than him, who decided to prop him up this way. That's all to say, there's a lot of things that got at this point. So I'm super glad to have us be doing something else. And so that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Seek Me by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Phil Thomas.
I'm Elford Stevens.
I'm Kate.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.